Welcome to The Outlet, an NBA podcast hosted by Nick Fay and Kory Waldron.
On this episode of The Outlet, Kory and I are joined by Jac Manuell to discuss our top 5 restricted NBA free agents. As always, you can find The Outlet on all streaming platforms. Enjoy the show. We wrapped up on restricted free agents. Now we're on to restricted free agents. Obviously not as much in terms of action for these guys because, the team that does have their rights can match any offer unless they're rescinded. But kick things off, we'll start with number 5, Jakob Poeltl. Thoughts on him and his game?
Yeah, Jakob Squirtle Squad. I'm all about Jakob Poeltl. I wonder if there's like a Jakob Poeltl stan account, like the Aaron Baines fan account. Maybe we should start that, get some traction for OTG. But in saying that, I think Jakob Poeltl is a similar sort of mold to what Ivica Zubac is for the Los Angeles Clippers. Does a lot of good things in limited time, and when he's out there, he's just always impactful. And I think if they're going down a youth route, LaMarcus Aldridge in the latter points of his career, I think Jakob Poeltl is going to be a really sort of serviceable center for them going forward. But the money would maybe be, the sort of mid-level exception. You're always going to give him a little bit more in that sort of first contract as a restricted free agent. You pay overs to retain the guy. Not sure if he has a market outside of San Antonio. There might be some other teams. But in saying that, I'm interested to hear your thoughts, K-Wall.
I mean, Jakob Poeltl, I think the biggest question mark is, how much better can he get at this point of his career? Like, obviously, he's never averaged more than 20 minutes per game in his career. The stats himself that he averages aren't terrible, right? 5.5 points, 5.5 rebounds. But again, doesn't have a 3-point shot in his game. Is 7'1", 62% from the field. Only 46% from the free throw line. So again, I just don't think there's a high ceiling for Jakob Poeltl. So I don't see anyone obviously breaking the bank to get Jakob Poeltl. Now, of course, with, like you mentioned, Jack, LaMarcus Aldridge, probably near the end of his career, maybe even traded at some point of this year by San Antonio. Does Jakob Poeltl get a boost in minutes? Do we see a change in his play with the boost of minutes? I'm not so sure. I think he's a solid, 7th or 8th guy off the bench. But I'm not overly thrilled about Jakob Poeltl. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I think Jack nailed it when he said serviceable center. You know what I mean? Like, he's not a guy that's going to go out there and drop 25 and have 18 boards or something like that. He's a guy that's going to do the dirty work. He has a pretty good offensive touch around the rim. Not really much of a jump shooter. Defensively, he's solid. Not really going to switch out to the perimeter and lock anybody down. But like you said, Kory, I don't think you're super excited about him. But he's a guy that I think could probably start on your team if you have 4 other good starters and kind of in that Golden State role, which we talked about with the unrestricted free agents, and not really have a ton of an impact, but just be there when you need him. It can give you some of those solid minutes. And like you said, Jack, I don't really think there's much of a market for him, so it could work out for San Antonio where they get him on a nice deal.
I think he's a good. I think he's underrated as a defender as well, as a big man defender. I think he does some nice things on the defensive end.
I will say, just looking at some of the advanced stats, because, of course, I've become the stat guy on these podcasts, he is a 2.0 on the defensive box plus minus. And, of course, the San Antonio Spurs, and we talked about DeMar DeRozan, he was a minus in the box plus minus last year for the Spurs, but Jakob Poeltl was a positive. And, obviously, he's been a positive box plus minus player for the last 3 years of his career, which is also somewhat promising.
Yeah, depends on how much you really buy into that stat. Obviously,
right.
You can go either way with that, but, Poeltl's a guy who'll probably end up in San Antonio, could end up being the starter for the next couple of years, or could be a backup big for them. Any other thoughts on him? Not necessarily the most exciting guy to kick off the list.
No, but I'm intrigued. Can we get Kory some glasses to make him look even more like sort of an analytics stat nerd? I feel like he can go in on that and sort of get he's got a nice little cardigan sort of thing going on right now for those that are watching us on YouTube. He's looking good. If he could become like a hipster daddy sort of thing with the glasses, hipster stat daddy.
Don't call me daddy. All right? Let's move past this.
Well, we'll move on to number 4. We got Dario Saric, obviously Phoenix Suns. Kicked off the career in Philadelphia, went to Minnesota, then in Phoenix. Showed some really good strides in the bubble. Not necessarily the most exciting guy, but still there's some potential for him in the modern NBA.
I just want to hear Kory Waldron say his name.
Dario Saric.
Jesus Christ, that was horrible. Dario Saric. Saric.
Dario Saric. What did I say?
You said Sardric or something. I'm just like, what are you talking about? Some dude in one of the Croatian
or
Euro?
Call him by his nicknames.
Super Mario.
Super Dario.
Oh.
CC. Okay? Is that better? Can I call him by the nicknames? Yes, his nickname is CC. Like yes in Spanish. Like CC.
I was like, we have a flavor brand of corn chips, tortilla chips called CC's down here. I'm like, what, is he a corn chip? Anyway, Dario Saric, enough about potato chips and nicknames. In terms of what he has done, we look at the mold of what he was in Philadelphia as a near rookie of the year contender. I think I've chatted to Nick before. I think Nick would have had him as rookie of the year. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right. I thought he was really good his rookie season. I mean, you could argue that was some of his best basketball his rookie year over what we've seen the last few seasons.
Yeah, and it's not to say that development still isn't there. I think that we get caught up in the moment and think just development is always just going to be on a trajectory, but it's not linear. We see people say take steps back. Situation matters. Obviously, in Phoenix right now, there are a lot of sort of wings that are sort of questionable on the right. Well, like they have potential. You got Bridges, you got Oubre, you got Cam Johnson, you got Dario Saric. I'm losing. How do I say it now? But in saying that, I just think that he's got good size about him. Good prototypical archetype for the modern NBA. You look at the likes of the other sort of big Euro wings, Gallinari, Bogdanovic, these sort of dudes. They have long careers and they add value to a team. Whether Dario Saric can get to that point where he's going to add potential and add winning value to an NBA team, whether that's in Phoenix or beyond, they could probably get him for unders in Phoenix, and I think that they could do worse than have some depth at the wing position, which is obviously the most important position in the NBA. If the three-point shot keeps falling at a decent enough rate and he improves it to, a lethal rate like Gallinari has and even Bogdanovic has, and if he becomes at least a capable defender, he's going to have a very long career in this league.
Corey, what are those three-point numbers?
So those 3-point numbers, thank you, Nick. His shooting numbers, right? So 47% from the field, 35.7% from three, 84% from the free throw line. And to top it off, actually, last year, funny enough, he had his highest true shooting percentage of his career at 59.2%. So decent shooting numbers. Definitely had a bounce back because, as you mentioned, after that rookie campaign in Philly, he definitely got a little bit, off balance for wherever he was. It because Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons were starting to blossom, maybe that he kind of lost his spot. And then, of course, went to Minnesota, just never really worked out there. But then, looking at the field goal percentage by distance, as I mentioned, 50% in the mid-range, 48% on long twos, only 23% on corner threes, which is somewhat problematic for a guy who shoots 35% from three. Not being able to hit the corner threes is a little bit of a concern. But Dario Saric, that was terrible. Sorry, Dario, if you're listening, that wasn't so good.
Bad.
I really hyped myself up for that, and but again, looking for a guy who can play the power forward position. Saric, I don't even want to say it anymore. It's just,
you're getting good.
This is like
enough.
The worst one. He's a really good, I think, still offensive player. Defensively, there is a lot to be desired, I think, still. But I think if you had him, I think coming off the bench would probably suit him best. But again, he can provide some offense in the right setting.
Yeah, I think that corner three, if he can improve that, it would make him so much more valuable because we've talked about it before. It's a little tougher to get your power forward shots at the top of the key. It's a little bit easier if you tuck them in the corner because then you're pulling away that other big, hurting that weak side of rim protection, making rotations a little bit harder. So if he can improve that number and become a better corner three-point shooter, I think that'd have an impact. He's a nice complementary offensive player because he's okay handling the ball a little bit, can throw some good passes. You said the numbers, Corey, can kind of score on all three levels, not necessarily at the highest efficiency, but not a bad player. I don't necessarily know if you want him to be a starter. Ideally, I think maybe as like your seventh player, maybe your sixth man, but not bad. And like you mentioned, Jack, I think he really got hurt being like flipped around in different situations. Like he never really got comfortable. And I feel like that's kind of more common with international players because it's already a struggle. They're coming to the United States trying to fit in. Now all of a sudden they're feeling comfortable. He's probably feeling good in Philly. Then all of a sudden traded to Minnesota, now in Phoenix. Now he finally got in a groove. And who knows if he ends up back there. I mean, it looks like he probably will, given that there's not a ton of teams with cap space and restricted free agency isn't the most common thing. But I wouldn't be completely surprised if someone tried to throw an offer sheet at him.
I think every team that has space, New York, Charlotte, Detroit, Atlanta, even in Miami to an extent, they like their sort of Euro dudes with Goran Dragic there. I think you can do worse than bet on a guy who has potential at an incredibly important position and has yet to show his fullest potential and have that stability and consistency where he feels comfortable, like you mentioned, Nick. So I personally think, like you said, seventh or eighth man. He started in his rookie season for a team that was really, really, really good. I think he can be a starter. I think the situation needs to be
The
right
Sixers
for him
weren't
to
really,
be
really
that.
good his rookie season.
Okay, well,
They were like borderline playoff team, and then Joel Embiid got hurt, and they were a bad team.
So, still, probably what the Phoenix Suns are right now, to an extent. I think that he can be a starter, be the fifth starter. I think he's better than Jakob Poeltl, in terms of the value at the wing position is just greater, and in that sort of sense. Atlanta need wings. Detroit need wings. Who doesn't need wings in today's day and age of the NBA? You can do worse than sort of go, you know what? Let's give this guy, $5-6 million on a couple of years. I think that Dario Saric, potential is there, consistency yet to find it. Situation, hopefully it all meshes together.
Kory, you got his age in front of you by chance?
He's 26.
26. Okay.
Yeah.
So, he's starting to get up there a little bit, but again, not in the great situations. And the only thing that would scare me if I'm like one of those teams, it's like it's going to lock up my cap space. And do I want to lock up my cap space for Dario Saric? And I'm not saying the extent of like moving forward year to year. It's like while that offer sheet is out until the other team accepts it, you can't really make a move. And I'm not really sure if like Dario's a guy that I'm like, oh my God, I'm a young team. I need to add this player. I feel like he almost might be a better fit on like a semi-playoff team. It would probably make more sense for Atlanta because they're trying to strive for the playoffs, and he would give them some of that versatility and probably a skill set they don't really have.
Yeah.
See, I think the otherwise. I think Atlanta would look for someone who's more established, whereas Detroit or Charlotte, one of those teams, what are they going to do with their space? They're not going to get any free agents. And Charlotte get a max space next year as well once the Batum contract is off the book. So I think those two teams who just need any semblance of young talent. I think the age 26, I think obviously he came in late as well. He's only had a couple of seasons in the NBA. So for me, he's still yet to hit his prime. I think he'll hit it like that sort of late 20s. 28, 29. I think that's where, if we don't see the peak of Dario, then, he's going to be a bust or flame out a little bit. So I personally think, I think the opposite. I think that while he would be a good fit on those teams like Nick was sort of alluding to, I personally think if I was a GM, if I was Troy Weaver, if I was Mitch Kupchak, I'd do worse and go, you know what, this guy's got something. And he can shoot the three ball. And I think, all those sort of teams, you look at what he can do as a three-point shooter. At the very least, even if he doesn't become a good defender, he can do that.
Yeah, I think he's a solid player. I'm probably a little bit lower on his potential than you. I'm not sure if he's shown enough in terms of, like, flashes that really is like, oh, Dario Saric, like, this is a guy that can be very good. I don't know. What are you thinking, Kory?
I mean, I think, like, if you're looking for offense, I think he can provide that. If you're looking for someone like Atlanta, I don't think it makes sense only because I think they need more defense than they do offense. I don't necessarily like that fit, but a team like Charlotte, a team like Detroit, where you're looking, you're just trying to find the next wave of young talent. You could find you could find Saric. I don't want to say it anymore.
Just say Dario.
This is like I'm having a horror. Halloween's over, but I'm still in a nightmare. God damn it. I think he can be a productive player on a team that's looking to either build new talent, build a new culture. I just don't see a lot of teams that actually are playing for any meaningful basketball to really have a spot for him at this point in time.
Yeah, with
but
lack
again,
of cap space, it's just a really tough situation for a lot of these guys. And restricted free agents are kind of in the worst situation out of anybody.
100%.
So, but moving on to number 3, somebody who's been in the news a little bit, Malik Beasley. Obviously, really popped off from Minnesota after that trade there. But, dealing with some legal issues. We don't have the full-on details. I know you guys know a little bit more than me on that.
Yeah, he was charged with using a rifle to threaten a family who was house hunting in his neighborhood in suburban Minneapolis. He apparently is heading to a court with threats of violence and drug possession. His wife as well was charged with the felony drug count. So who knows how that eventuates, but serious certain things happening off the court for Malik Beasley. And I think that it obviously clearly affects his value because, my little write-up that I'm doing, I initially had him like, this guy can get 4 years, $50 million, 4 years, $60 million. He's repped, I think, by Clutch Sports, and we know how much they want to max out the amount of money that their players get. They're really good at that. But also, I think this also works in the Minnesota Timberwolves front office and Gerson Rosas, and they're sort of, it's a benefit for them in some ways because it's like, we could probably get him for half price. But at the same time, you want to have a player that it's still a risk because will he go to jail? Will he have? I think KCP this season was under some form of house. Yeah, last year, and like he could only play like home games or something like that. Now, I have no idea how this is going to play out for Malik Beasley, so I guess I'll talk a little bit about his on-court production. They gave up stuff to get him in. Him and Juancho Hernan-Gomez, who isn't in our top 5, but we might as well have a little bit of a chat about him. Those two were pieces that they gave up, picks to acquire, and now it seems as if, well, did you give up too much? Obviously, you can't foresee such absolutely random and crazy circumstances happening off the court, but that $50, $60 million could turn into $20, $30 million, turns into 2 years rather than 4 years, 5 years, or whatever. And I think that gives the Timberwolves a little bit of leeway. Maybe another team tries to activate the salary cap in a certain way, because what he did in Minnesota was awesome. I know Kory's going to throw us the stat daddy's going to throw us some nice stats at us. Great three-point shooter, not necessarily the best defensively, but could be at least another starter to build alongside Cat and D'Lo. But man, that off-court stuff certainly does put me off a little bit, if not a lot.
Right. So let's hop into what the numbers were with the Minnesota Timberwolves last year after being traded from Denver. 20.7 points per game, 5 rebounds, 1.9 assists on shooting splits of 47, 42, and 75. And the 42% from 3 were on 8.2 3-pointers attempted a game. So you really love that amount of offense coming from Malik Beasley, obviously in a bigger role. Advanced numbers, 59.1 true shooting percentage, shot 50% on corner threes, shot 50% in the mid-range, a long twos only 30%, but that's good. He didn't take long-range twos. So that's all good. But again, we mentioned about the off-court stuff, it is also worth mentioning that not just a year ago, past October, he also got into a fight in a hotel, lobby with an NFL player. So this is now the second time in a year in which we have Malik Beasley having some sort of off-the-court issue that I think he was suspended by the Denver Nuggets for some time to start off last year because of the incident in the lobby for fighting. And now we have a gun issue. So that's the biggest concern for me with Malik Beasley, because we clearly saw with Minnesota in a bigger role, he can provide offense. The defense a little bit more questionable, but the offensive impact he can provide is there, especially if you're thinking, he wouldn't even be the second option because he'd be behind Karl-Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, and then Malik Beasley would probably be the third, maybe the fourth option. So you would like
end up with LaMelo Ball or somebody, and then you know what I mean? He just gets pushed down even more.
Right. But again, back to the contract, I don't know what it's going to be, because it's very hard to gauge a player when there's all of this off-the-court chaos, because he could either get a very low amount of money, a short-term contract, which somebody says, prove to us that we can trust you, or we could see a team like the Knicks or the Hornets who think, well, if they don't want to invest money in them, I'll invest money in them, because what do we have to lose?
Yeah, I think his skill set is almost a perfect fit for Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell. You said, 50% on corner threes? You're running pick and roll, pick and pop with D'Lo and Cat. D'Lo's great at throwing those corner passes. Boom, that just helps your offense so much. And they don't necessarily have a great three-point shooters other than D'Lo, Cat, and himself. A lot of those guys are struggling to even shoot, like 33% from three. So Beasley's a guy they don't want to lose. And like Jack said, this is a guy who was part of the Robert Covington trade. A very valuable piece, a very valuable player on a valuable contract. And now you're in a tough situation because you want to pay him to an extent. You want to keep him for 4 years because you could end up getting a steal like Jack mentioned. And we know a lot of championship teams end up being championship teams because things worked out for them in a cap way. Look at the Golden State with Steph Curry, even like the Nets, their situation, some of those contracts worked out so they could get KD and Kyrie. So this is a situation where it could go really well for the T-Wolves, or it could go really bad because they could sign him on one of those cheaper deals for 4 years, but then he could end up, having to deal with some other legal issues, or there could be another incident down the line. So there's just so many different variables here. And I could see another team kind of trying to swoop in. Like, three-point shooters are hard to come by. And the only, other good young player that's a three-point shooter that's, we're going to talk about Bogdanovic in a little bit. You got Joe Harris. And, after that, you're not necessarily looking at a ton of great guys other than Davis Bertans. And it feels like Joe Harris, Bertans, these are guys that are going to be swooped up right away. You know what I mean? Or they're going to re-sign with their team. So this could be a guy that maybe the other teams go after. The New York Knicks really need a good three-point shooter. This would be a guy that maybe it could work out, but do you feel comfortable with him living in New York City where there could be even more incidents, and they might not even be his fault? Just the nature of New York City is kind of crazy sometimes.
Yeah, I think that any GM is going to proceed with caution, whether it's the front office in Minnesota right now or any opposing front office, because while we talk about basketball and while we talk about the on-court product, and Kory made a very compelling argument to acquire a guy like Malik Beasley with that talent and that efficiency, in a role that basically you want, a guy who can play alongside superstars. But character matters, and we hear about it probably more so this time of year when it comes to the draft stuff. Malik Beasley, when we're looking at it purely, we're not reducing these players to just assets. But part of the free agency sort of talk is looking at it. What is he as an asset? Now he's a depressed asset because of all of the misbehavior that's happening off the court. And like Kory alluded to, this isn't a one-time thing, a random sort of thing. This has happened more than one occasion. One time is a mistake. 2 times it's a trend, and 3 times obviously, strike out, whatever sport analogy you want to do. I don't watch a lot of baseball, but
and both being violent, right? Or at least one being violent and one being the act of violence because he had a weapon, and that's the concern. It's not just like bad behavior in which he got drunk or acted a fool or maybe he misspoke. Like this was someone getting aggressive, and aggression is the worst thing you can see from somebody, especially who's only 23 years old, because he's young and making mistakes which are never good.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's still a chance you can clean up being only 23-year-olds. Being in a better situation with, some strong veterans could always help that too. So, obviously, very intriguing stuff. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe if you're offering somebody a contract that's a restricted free agent from an opposing team, it has to be a minimum of 3 years. So, it's not like they can offer him a 1-year deal on restricted free agency. I believe, don't quote me on this, I know the home team that could re-sign him, they have the qualifying offer, they can send the thing, which is obviously only a 1-year contract. So that kind of makes things a little bit more interesting. Obviously, as details come out about this, we'll have a better idea of the situation. But moving on to number 2, we got Bogdan Bogdanovic, not Bojan Bogdanovic, Sacramento King here. Obviously, season was all over the place for him because at one point it was like a lock that he was going to be traded. There was a lot of talk about him going to the Lakers, and all of a sudden the Kings were like, no, we actually want to keep him. So this is kind of a toss-up for their cap situation because, like we've talked about in the past, Buddy Hield's got a big number.
They need to keep him. Simple as that. He was one of, if not De'Aaron Fox is obviously their best young asset. They're hoping Marvin Bagley can be the second best. But for me right now, he's their second best player. Buddy Hield isn't even returning texts. My guy, they're texts. It's not that hard. But Kory, ever in your life, have you sort of gotten a text from whether it's,
Listen, girls leave me on read all the time, Jack. I'm not the right person to be asking.
Probably not the best person to ask that. But in saying that, it's not hard to return a text, my guy. Yeah, a call. I never pick up a call. I screen that shit. And I wait till I'm like, okay, what's the voicemail here? Cool, I'll call this person back. I know who they are. It's not a telemarketer or some BS along those lines. But the reason why I bring Buddy Hield up is because, like Nick mentioned, it is an inflated contract, like 4 years, $90 million. It's kicking in or it's just kicked in. And the amount of money that's tied up to the salary cap space is going to affect what Bogdan Bogdanovic gets from the new Sacramento front office. Their futures within that organization or beyond are intertwined, no matter if you like it or not. Now, to me, I'm putting all my money and energy into Bogdan Bogdanovic because, 1, he's a better player. 2, he has a better versatile skill set. And 3, he produced this season, despite the fact that obviously what they produced as a team in the bubble was lackluster to say the least. I just think he's a perfect sort of second ball handler. Guy can play with the second unit, can run the floor a little bit, can create his own shot, create shots for others. Those are skills that are incredibly important in today's NBA. Whether it's next to De'Aaron Fox in the closing lineup or like I said, with the backups, I think he can provide just immense value to this team going forward in their push for an eventual player. When was the last time they made the playoffs? Before Kory was born? I don't know. Probably 20 years ago, 25 years ago. You're the baby on this podcast, my guy.
No, they were in the playoffs in the early 2000s, so.
There we go.
I'm 26. I'm not I'm a baby, but I'm not a baby. Come on, man.
You're still younger than us,
my guy. Is he a baby or a daddy? I don't know. I'm getting confused.
He's a baby daddy, maybe. Who knows? Hey, I'm not putting it out there.
I hope not.
But you better have protected sex next time, Kory.
Getting back to the point at hand, Bogdan Bogdanovic is a priority for the Sacramento Kings. And if they don't make him a priority, then another team definitely will.
Yeah, I mean, the Buddy Hield and Bogdan Bogdanovic stuff, it's really, tough to gauge, in my opinion, only because, I mean, you're right when it comes to the price tag, because Buddy Hield, he signed that 4-year, $94 million deal with the Sacramento Kings. And it wasn't like he had a terrible year this year, because Buddy averaged, 19 points per game on shooting splits of 42, 39, and 84. Those aren't bad numbers by any means. He was taking over 9 threes a game, doing exactly what you wanted him to do. Definitely fell short in the bubble, but he was also one of the guys who came down with coronavirus, with COVID before the bubble, was, coming back from it. So, maybe he just didn't get back into full shape. We also don't know the long-term effects of a coronavirus. But that's a completely different podcast. And Bogdanovic proved
Luke
that.
Walton sucks.
What'd you say, Nick?
Obviously, the relationship with Luke Walton sucks too.
Right. Yeah, and the relationship with Luke Walton is terrible. They didn't get along. And then, Bogdan Bogdanovic, as we kind of mentioned, was arguably about to be traded, and he really worked his way into the lineup, into staying in the lineup. 15 points per game, 3.4 rebounds, 3.4 assists, shooting splits of 44, 37, and 74. Still averages 7.2 3-pointers a game. So again, you're not going wrong with either of these guys, but it being, a lower cap situation across the board, you might be able to get Bogdanovic for a cheaper price tag and then flip Buddy Hield for some better assets, which might be better for the long-term success of the Sacramento Kings.
You might be able to get Bogdanovic at half the number of Buddy Hield, especially in this cap situation. Like, I think Buddy's making 24, 27 this year. Like, if Bogdanovic signed for 12, I wouldn't be surprised. I could see him even signing for less. I could see another team trying to swoop in, especially if Sacramento's like, all right, we know we're not going to be able to move Buddy, or maybe there's a sign and trade out there. Like, I wouldn't rule that out completely. It's not as common with restricted free agents, but if they're in a situation where they know that they're not going to be able to retain them, or it just doesn't make sense because they're not going to be able to move other parts on their roster, or maybe they draft a guard or somebody in that position, in the draft and move up. Who knows? So, like, I wouldn't rule that out as a possibility, too, because he's an attractive player for a lot of teams because of that, secondary ball handler, that six-man role that he can kind of play off the bench for you and give you just some really nice offensive skill set.
And again, both of these guys, too, they're both 28 years old. So they're not going to get much better.
Yeah.
Or maybe they can get slightly better, but this is the prime of probably both of their careers. And I think you feel better about, like you said, Nick, Bogdanovic being a sixth-man, lead guard off the bench, whereas Buddy's kind of a weird role. Is he a starter? What kind of option is he on a starting team that's actually competing for anything? So I think there's more question marks, I feel like, about Buddy right now than there are about Bogdanovic, despite them both being 28.
Yeah, I feel like Buddy would be better off in a situation like a la Philadelphia, where he's playing off Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid and getting those three-point shots, coming off like a million screens. Darren Fox wasn't necessarily amazing this year. It took him a little bit to kind of get healthy, and I feel like it just was a really weird situation with Sacramento. Not trying to put all of it on Luke Walton, but I just feel like there's just something not right there, because, I mean, even going to the season, we expected them to be a little bit better than they were, and they were just kind of all over the place. You never really knew what to expect from the Kings.
Yeah. I will say for Buddy that I want to point out, he did average 48% on corner three-pointers, which is really nice to see. His counterpart in Bogdanovic average I don't have that number in front of me. Someone else talk and I'll get.
No, I think Buddy, obviously his elite skill is three-point shooting. Like, that's what he's, you know what I mean? That's his best skill, shooting off-balance threes. He can obviously score in a couple different ways too, but three-point shooting is like a big reason why he got that contract, and that was kind of the hype when he came in the draft. So it's like, I think you might have brought this up in the past, Jack. They brought in Alvin Gentry, and obviously there's a relationship from New Orleans. So you think that could help him, Jack?
I personally think that it's not necessarily blatantly obvious, but it can't hurt at all.
Yeah.
I also think, I can't remember if this was Vlade Divac or the owner Vivek Ranadive who compared him to Stephen Curry.
Yeah. It was the owner, I'm pretty sure.
So there's clearly a desire from the people at hand, the people that have voice within the Sacramento Kings organization. It just seems to me, like you mentioned there, Luke Walton, who isn't a very likable figure, it seems, in today's NBA for a lot of reasons that might touch on in future podcasts. But I think that it is at least something that bodes well. Like, if you were to hire a coach from a different organization, we wouldn't even be talking about it.
Yep.
But this has to at least sway him somewhat. And Alvin Gentry is an incredibly well-liked figure by not just he's the teams that he's coached with, but just around the NBA. He's known as being just an awesome guy, really good communicator, and I think he'll help the Sacramento Kings offense too. And I think he'll help Buddy, if he does stay there. But you got those numbers for me, K-Ball?
Yeah, Bogdanovic is just a better all-around scorer, by the numbers at least. Buddy Hield, they both shoot 67% from inside 3 feet. But then when you look at the mid-range, Buddy struggles to get above 40% from 3 to 10 feet, from 10 to 16 ever on the deep mid-range jump shots, whereas Bogdanovic is 45%, 43, and 55% on long twos. And obviously, corner threes is 48 for Buddy, and then 36 from Bogdanovic, which isn't bad because Bogdanovic can score in a variety of ways. And obviously, I would say he's probably the better facilitator than Buddy Hield.
He can run pick and roll too. Buddy's not really that's not really the big part of his game. So Bogdanovic is a guy that literally can be your secondary creator and can lead the bench unit. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him. And Sacramento's all over the place, so it wouldn't surprise me if another team kind of swooped in. We've mentioned, the Knicks. I think even some of the contending teams could look at him as hey, this could be my sixth man too. It just kind of really depends on that number and really what he wants, because like you mentioned, Kory, not necessarily the youngest guy, so maybe he's looking to go to a winning situation. He's like, please don't re-sign me, Sacramento.
Yeah.
Remember that story where it was I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, where it's just oh yeah, I'm actually 26, I'm not 25.
Oh, for Buddy, yeah.
What? How does that happen? When you are getting signed or going to the draft, it's so it's 1992 or is it 1993? Just whatever. How does that actually happen? Really?
Sacramento said that they knew his age already, but it just wasn't a publicly known thing.
I have no words. I have no words. It still befuddles me. I'm still without speech, however many years later after finding out this news.
But moving on to number 1, Brandon Ingram, coming off an amazing season, just really popped off, starting to look like he hit that potential we saw when he was drafted. And a guy that we don't think is going to leave New Orleans. It's almost a guarantee. I mean, he might get an offer sheet, but I would be 100% surprised if they didn't match. He's a guy that's going to be in New Orleans with Zion and give them that all-star duo moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, his arms are as big as mine. But even though he's been
just a foot longer,
yeah, just my wingspan. Yeah, you can't see obviously on Skype right now, but he's certainly got some extensive reach compared to me. I liked what he was doing in the bubble, ordering plenty of Popeyes, put on that weight, get the protein going. Not necessarily sure the balance between fat and protein. Kory would probably know a little bit more than me about Popeyes, as well as just the protein balance for him going forward and building that muscle. My guy K-Wall is jacked and thick as hell. But Brandon Ingram had an awesome season. And I know Nick and I always, whenever I see a player in person, I always have a subjective bias towards them. And Brandon Ingram is one of those players. The Nets were lucky to beat the Pelicans because Brandon Ingram turned into Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant wasn't playing that game, but it certainly looked like he was. He was hitting absolutely freaking everything. Now, I'm sure Kory will throw the numbers at us, but to me, the numbers were just 100% from every single position on the floor. His reach is insane. One area that I'm intrigued to see if Stan Van Gundy can get out of him if he is retained, because I think that I'm not as totally 110% certain as you are, Nick. I think that there's going to be some sort of finagling behind the scenes. I think David Griffin's going to be well, is there any way that we can sort of not offend him by sort of doing this or back-ending the deal or front-ending the deal? I don't think so. He does deserve the max. He's one of the more valuable wings in today's league, if not one of the most valuable young wings going forward. But in saying that, if that were to happen, a team like the Atlanta Hawks would just be yep, we'll give you the 5-year max or 4-year max or whatever it is that you can do as an opposing team in restricted free agency. But he's just had an awesome season. The defense needs to come. And if that defense comes, then, man, he could be on, Jason Tatum levels of good.
I've been waiting to pounce. The minute you said there's a slight chance in your mind that he doesn't come back, there's no way we see Brandon Ingram in any other uniform than the Pelicans, Jack. I don't ever want to hear that come out of your mouth. That was one of the craziest things I've ever heard from you. You have said some crazy things, even in the last 30 minutes. They traded Anthony Davis for Brandon Ingram, True. Josh Hart, and Lonzo Ball. Lonzo Ball's future to me is way more up in the air than Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram, let's keep in mind, too, was an all-star this year and won most improved. 23 points per game, 6.1 rebounds, 4.2 assists on shooting splits of 46, 39, and 85. And his numbers kind of got a little dropped when Zion came back because Brandon Ingram kind of lost the rhythm of being the number one guy, trying to figure out how to work Zion Williamson back in the mix. But no joke about it, Brandon Ingram is a blossoming star. You know, the debate of, like, would you rather have Tatum and Ingram or, you know, Jaylen Brown is like an interesting debate to have because all three of those guys are extremely promising at this point, being so young. Again, Ingram's just 22 years old. Like you mentioned, Jack, I agree defensively. He needs to get better. He needs to get more locked in on that end. I felt like at times that was the Pelicans' issue is it was Jrue Holiday playing defense, and then they had no rim protection, so then no one else really locked in to play defense. And obviously Lonzo was in and out. But again, offensively, this was a team I kept track of. I watched a ton of Pelicans games last year. I still don't know why. It was Pacers-Pelicans. If it started with a P, I was watching it. And the Pelicans... Pistons at one point in the year, at like 35 games, they had lost like 29 of the 35 games by less than 10 points, and then half of those games by less than 5 points. So this was just a young team looking to figure things out. And I think figuring things out for them is just Zion playing a full season, Brandon Ingram getting better offensively and better defensively, and now they have a good head coach, and they're starting to get things back into order. But I think Brandon Ingram's a star, a stud, and he's going to be back with the Pelicans, no doubt in my mind.
Yeah,
one thing.
Go ahead, Jack.
Sorry, Nick. I'll throw it at both of you. Are you not at least questioning the fit with Ingram and Zion going forward as a tandem young duo? I just think that there is. How can you be so blatantly like, nah?
You can't see my face, but I understand your mindset because I think there is some concern about the fit. But Brandon Ingram is such a good player that you retain him regardless, and then if you have to trade him down the line, trade him down the line because he's that good. And I think the biggest jump for him was. Kory could confirm this with the stats, but the jump in three-point shooting. Like, he wasn't really a good three-point shooter, and then going to this year, adding that to his game. Hit me with the numbers, Kory.
So he shot 33% on only 1.8 threes per threes attempted a game, and this year he averaged 6.2 threes a game on 39. So he just started shooting them at massive volume.
That's a major change in your game, especially in the current NBA and the way people were defending him, and it's just easier for him to operate that way. And defensively, his last year in LA, he was actually a pretty good defender. It's just like Kory kind of mentioned. New Orleans didn't really defend other than Jrue Holiday. Alvin Gentry is not known as the defensive coach. System was really questionable, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the reasons why he was fired or let go, whatever you want to put it. And I could see Stan Van Gundy unlocking him and having a better idea of what they're going to do, especially because there's a lot of versatility if he can unlock not only Brandon Ingram, but Zion as well, because we know defensively he could be great. He just last year, he didn't put in the effort. I don't know if it was conditioning or whatever it was, not understanding NBA defenses, but there's plenty of potential for New Orleans to make a big jump defensively this season, including Brandon Ingram.
For sure. And another stat you'll like, Nick, he was 44% on corner threes.
Yeah, and when you got Zion, a guy who is just like gravitating everyone to the paint because he's just such a dominating force down there, that's going to lead to more open threes for Brandon Ingram. It's going to be more a question about filling around those two guys and seeing, the moves that they make this offseason. I'll be intrigued for what happens to Lonzo Ball, but we'll save that for another show.
Yeah, ideally, I think you would love to see a small ball lineup, but again, it isn't going to work unless Zion and Ingram get better defensively. Because that was the issue with Zion too. Zion wasn't that good of a defender in his short amount of time in the NBA.
He was horrible. He wasn't just
right. It's really bad. But if you can get Zion to play decent defense at a small ball 5 and then Ingram at the 4, that's probably where those two would work best side by side. But again, they both need to get better defensively for that to actually work.
Yeah, or maybe pulling a stretch 5 like your guy Miles Turner. That's a possibility.
Yeah.
We'll save that.
Send Jrue Holiday. I'm all for the Holiday brothers in Indiana, but you're going to lose some defense, I guess, if you're the Pelicans.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes having a rim protector can make up for it. But any other thoughts on Brandon Ingram?
One thing I wanted to throw at you guys, who would you rather have on if you're building a team from scratch? Jaylen Brown or Brandon Ingram? Kory?
I'm going to say Jaylen Brown because Jaylen Brown to me is more of a complete player at this point in time. Like, obviously, the defense is already in favor of Jaylen Brown. Now, I think Ingram is the better offensive player. But the one thing I think a lot of people have seen, and I saw it this year too, is Jaylen Brown got more aggressive and his handles got better in terms of creating his own offense this year for the Celtics. Now, granted, when we saw, in the Eastern Conference Finals and the playoffs, too many times Jaylen Brown let himself fall back in the offense and wasn't aggressive enough, which I think is a problem. But I think he definitely got better on the offensive end, and I trust his defense enough to say I would prefer him. But again, Ingram's the better offensive player, I think.
Yeah, I'd say this about Jaylen Brown's defense. On ball, he's really good. Off ball, he falls asleep way too much. For somebody who's supposed to be a good defender, he got beat on backdoor cuts on like a regular basis in the playoffs, and that's just something you don't want to see from, somebody who's a quote-unquote good defender, which I think he has the skills. It's just kind of being more focused. I think if you're starting from scratch the way you put out the question, Jack, I think you go with Brandon Ingram because he could possibly be your first option. Jaylen Brown, I don't think can ever really be a first option. I think he's more of a second option, more of a complementary to a superstar. And I think you could really make an argument like Brandon Ingram is 22 years old. Like we can be talking about him being a superstar in 2 years. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities. Like think about how much of a jump he just made in his three-point shooting in one offseason. Like what happens if he starts working on other aspects of his game to that extent? I'm not going to say he's going to turn into Kevin Durant or anything like that, but there's still a lot of room for growth for Brandon Ingram. Obviously, Jaylen Brown too, but I just think Ingram still has more potential just given his, freakish physical traits.
Well, I think also just given the roles, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, in Boston, Jaylen Brown's never going to necessarily have the ability to be that number one guy, where Ingram is, I think you want him to be your number one scoring option if you're the Pelicans. I guess you probably prefer it to be Zion because he's going to be a generational, talent and freak. But, Ingram, I think, has an easier route than already Boston because I think Tatum's just, that much higher up.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't think Jaylen has the potential to be a number one option. That's just my opinion. I think he's a great player. He can be a two-way guy and play right next to your superstar and be next to, people compare him to Paul George. I think it's more of Paul George next to Kawhi Leonard than Paul George, who is the MVP candidate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm high on Ingram as well. Again, subjective bias seeing him in person, and also dislike the Celtics because I don't like
could
people
have been
in green.
Jaylen Brown could have been on the Nets.
Yeah, but I think the obvious sort of standpoint and the obvious takeaway from what you guys are saying is what's Jaylen Brown's peak offensively and what's Brandon Ingram's peak defensively. And I think that once you get the complete version of these two players, you're probably looking at if both players reach their potential. Brandon Ingram is by far the easiest sort of guy to go, yep, easily picking him. But Jaylen Brown, like Kory said, is already closer and has less gaps and less weaknesses in his game and has shown improvements and strides as an offensive player. I think that he's still got room for growth there, and I think that, those miscommunications and lapses in defense, Nick, are easy to clean up for a guy who's still quite young and only just, got a rookie extension himself last season. That was actually questioned in terms of the price and the length and everything else. And now it's just like, nah, he deserves that and he deserves every single penny of it.
It was compared to Buddy Hield, funny enough, too, I think. I remember having a bad take saying I would rather have Buddy Hield than Jaylen Brown. So,
old takes exposed or cold takes exposed, whatever the Twitter is. But yeah, I'm intrigued to see because I think that the young wings in today's league, Jason Tatum's probably a cut above everyone else, but I think Ingram can compete with Tatum maybe in years to come. Like you mentioned, Nick, his age, he was, I think, the youngest rookie in his class when he was drafted. So 22 years old right now, already an all-star. Does he have all NBA capabilities like Jason Tatum does? I would say in 2 years' time, I would be surprised if he's not in that conversation.
Yeah, I think there's the potential is there with Ingram. And I'd say another thing with him, too, is I think he's starting to mature from like a personality perspective and just like his mindset on the court, getting rid of some of those bad shots, just understanding what he needs to do to be an NBA player. And that's hard, sometimes, especially in LA, given all the pressure that was on him, like, oh, you need to be the superstar, you need to save the Lakers. Pelicans, not as much pressure. Now Zion's there, things got a lot easier. And now you have a great head coach. Not to say Alvin Gentry, I don't think he's a bad head coach. I just think probably Stan Van Gundy, a new voice coming in, can kind of show him some different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one last thing on Ingram. It's really good to see him having this success after the career-threatening off-the-court stuff in terms of the blood clots and everything. We saw a similar ailment cut Chris Bosh's career short.
Yep.
And, to see Brandon Ingram not only get past it, but absolutely thrive. If you put money on Brandon Ingram being an all-star this season, you would have got a lot of money back from it. So, it's awesome to see him come back from that. We love to see those sort of stories. And, it's only he's only going to be getting better and better, like we've all sort of mentioned.
Yeah, and he's a guy that can make that Anthony Davis trade not feel as bad. You know what I mean? If you were getting a superstar in return, then you don't really care as much. Obviously, they got the pick and things worked out and they got Zion, but still, you're going to look at that and be like, okay, that's not too bad. I know the Lakers just won a championship, but maybe we could be there in a few seasons. Any other thoughts on restricted free agency, guys?
No, not really.
Zero. It's I hate to sort of bring the energy down, but there's not a lot to sort of take away from the 5 guys we've spoken about. 2021 it's said to be the year. I think the unrestricted free agent class is a lot more intriguing. But it's not to say that one of these 5 guys or some others, some teams that do have a bit of space, and it's just like, you know what, let's throw a bit of money here, let's throw a bit of money there, because they are in the advantageous position right now in a league that is struggling financially, and there's so much uncertainty around the season ahead. There's going to be and as well the owners who do have the increased pocket and spending, because some of the owners have their wealth has increased, some of the others have gone downwards thanks to this pandemic. So it's going to be interesting to see what teams value what, be it restricted free agents, what talent they want to come in, be it the older guys, be it the veteran guys. It's going to be a fascinating offseason, and I think that when we start to talk about some trades as well, I think things are going to really fill out and get really spicy.
Yeah, it's a shitty year to be a restricted free agent, to be honest. It would be a lot better if you're a restricted free agent next year, because there'd be a lot more cap space. People are trying to go after superstars. They're going to have that leftover money. That's where you see the offer sheets come in. That's where you see hey, we didn't get our guy. We're going to try to take a swing at one of these young players and steal them away. Maybe the other team has some other thing in mind. But this year, it just honestly, it kind of sucks. A lot of these guys are going to end up probably getting underpaid, other than Brandon Ingram, because restricted free agency has so many restrictions to it, and it's in favor of the team that drafted you.
For sure. I do have one last question for you guys. Of these 5 we just went over, who do you think is most likely to not be returning back to the team that has the rights to them?
Malik Beasley. Oh, is it Dario Saric? Or is it Malik Beasley?
I think it might be Dario, because I think that Phoenix is one of the teams that might want to be aggressive, and they might rescind his number off their cap sheet so they can make that move. There have been some mentions of a Jeremy Grant, maybe making a trade. I've even seen crazy stuff like making a move for Chris Paul. Who knows what it could be? So I think Phoenix would be a team. It feels like for the last 10 years, they've been a team wanting to be aggressive, wanting to make a big splash move. Last year, it kind of worked for them. Ricky Rubio really helped change that team. So they're going to have some guys they want to retain. And obviously, who knows if Saric's going to want to be one of those guys, because like you mentioned before, Jack, they got Cam Johnson. They got Mikal Bridges. You know what I mean? And who knows what they're going to draft in the draft. So there might not be a spot for Dario Saric in that rotation. Then it just becomes a waste of your money.
Yeah.
But that wraps it up for restricted free agency. We'll be dropping these videos. We're going to hit you with some different stuff. Obviously, the draft is approaching, and like Jack mentioned, plenty of trade stuff, not only on here, but on otgbasketball.com too.
Peace out, knuckleheads.